So welcome back to the AEC Hive podcast. We're really excited to be with you today. We're going to be talking about innovation in architecture, engineering, and construction. I'm Ralph Montague. I'm a director at ArcDocs and co-founder of the AEC Hive, and I'm joined by my fellow co-founder, John Egan. John, you want to say a quick hi to everybody?
Hi, everyone. John Egan, the CEO at BIM Launcher and co-founder at AEC Hive, and I'm looking forward to another great conversation today.
So we're very excited today to be joined by a real innovator in the AEC sector, Nathan Wood, who is the founder and CEO, which I believe stands for Chief Enabling Officer for SpectrumAEC, and also Executive Director at the Construction Progress Coalition. And Nathan, you're very welcome. I love the hashtag you guys have at the CPC, shared pains. And I think, one thing we all share between the three of us is sort of a general frustration with certain aspects of the AEC, combined with a great love for the AEC sector and, wanting to see things become better. So maybe we could start, Nathan, with a bit of introduction from yourself and a bit of a talk about shared pains.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, and thank you guys for having me on. I think it's so cool when we can have these international discussions between, what's happening here in the U.S. and what's happening over there in Europe. So I'm a general contractor's perspective. That's sort of where I earn my stripes in the industry with DPR construction, that here in the U.S. is a top 10 general contractor now, has really grown out of healthcare and biopharmaceutical data center, very technical builder. And so, especially having started in the Silicon Bay area in San Francisco Bay, really prided themselves on being forward with technology and very innovative. So I sort of really, coming out of school in 2008, learned about everything that was possible with BIM and integrated project delivery and direct digital exchanges, throughout the supply chain, and really trying to kind of mix up the whole system of how AE and C work together. It was an amazing experience, probably almost to my detriment, because I feel like I drank the Kool-Aid in the beginning and kind of had this very glossy-eyed view of the industry. And so I joined DPR's corporate innovation team, where now you're visiting 18 offices across the U.S. and a lot of different regions with different cultures and different contracts and different levels of appetite for innovation, and really trying to figure out, what is the pain point? What is the problem that this technology is supposed to solve? Because DPR was very good at separating technology from innovation. I was kind of one of the first folks that was a quote unquote technology labeled person, or a BIM person that had been in the innovation group, because they almost tried to intentionally focus the innovation on the culture, because it is really about people, process, and culture. But I think really understanding the role that technology plays, not shying away from it when you talk about innovation, but really how it complements it. But really, it's not the leader of it. The leader of it is the people and the process. So, when we say shared pains through Construction Progress Coalition, it's really about those shared pain points that an architect, an engineer, a contractor, an owner, a municipality feels when, they're not getting either the workflow preferences or the data, or, what they're expecting or what they're needing. Kind of how we're failing each other is the shared pains that we all feel.
You've been somebody who's kind of been centrally involved in innovation. And I suppose one of the reasons we started AEC Hive is we generally felt that innovation and research and development in AEC sector was pretty low. And, the companies were spending probably less than 2%, maybe closer to 1% of revenues on research and development and innovation and making general improvements. And so the purpose was to sort of talk more about innovation and improving things. What's your feeling in industry in general? Like, obviously you've been very involved and you probably see innovation as central to all you do, but in general, in companies like DPR and others, is research and development higher on the agenda? Is innovation higher on the agenda?
I wouldn't say it's not innovation for the sake of innovation. It's innovation for a true expectation of competitive advantage. And, a lot of times we go back to a long acronym, WIFM, what's in it for me, really understanding what are the motivational factors behind innovation and the investment in innovation. And there can be multiple motivators. Here in the U.S., we've, over the last decade or so implemented or come out with basically an innovation tax credit of, I think, up to 1%. And that's a lot of where the salary and all the overhead costs that went into this innovation team that I was able to be part of was partially because there's a tax write-off. And so, there's a lot of these kind of how do we get multiple win-wins between both what we can get out of the potential innovation, but also kind of short-term wins. Because I think if you're not solving both the short-term and the long-term, you're not going to be able to, continue to move forward. It's either too idealistic or too short-sighted.
Absolutely. So as you went around to the different offices and the different groups, what sort of emerged as some of the bigger challenges that the industry is facing? When you talk about shared pains, like what's emerged as these are the really big items that just seem to be reoccurring? And
it's interesting because we can almost kind of categorize them into two categories: our internal shared pains within our company, and then our external shared pains that occur at the project level between companies. And so, if it's the field doesn't speak well to the office staff, or the, detailing group doesn't speak well to the production group, or, kind of internally, if the supply chain is broken down, that's typically because of a leadership and an organizational structure and a culture and things that more or less are within our control. So we like internal shared pains because they're the easiest ones to address. I mean, they're tough because it's people and culture and all these, things that we don't typically like to address, but at least we can address them. Because the alternative, the external shared pains, that if you're a subcontractor working with a general contractor, you're sort of have to own up to whatever their contract requirements are. Same with a general contractor to an owner or a designer to an owner. We have certain requirements that we have to fit within. So it's much more of a bartering, brokering kind of how can we work a deal type of an environment than it is something that you have complete control over. So we look at those more like roadblocks that sometimes we have to figure out workarounds for, as opposed to barriers where we can really, have a conversation, work our way through it, but it's not necessarily going to be easy. So I think, that's the best way that I try and, separate all these shared pains that basically boil down to either loss of data or duplication of data. It's one of the two things. It's either, waste because of duplicate data or risk because of loss of data. So it's one of those two factors. But I think what's more important is it internal to your company or is it external between companies?
Well, I suppose there's a few other things. Like it could be incorrect data, which obviously causes a lot of problems, or late information causes a lot of problems. So I suppose we normally think about data when you talk about good data and bad data. Good data is correct, it's on time, it's accessible, it's available, and then bad data is the opposite of all of those. It's incorrect, it's late, it's inaccessible or not available.
And what are the specific measurable thresholds of each of those things? That to me is never going to be universal. It has to be defined at the project level, but the categories are universal. So the decisions are project specific, but the categories and the questions are universal. And I think that's what all of us are working towards, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I liked the reference you made there to what's in it for me, because that speaks to incentives, and often the way projects are structured into siloed organizations who have a small piece of the pie, if you like, and a very specific role within a much bigger role. Often the incentives aren't there to do good to the overall project when you're just focusing on getting your piece done and not worrying too much about how your piece affects other people.
Oh, no, absolutely. And what we're talking about is linear versus circular economies or business models. And we very much lived within a linear zero-sum game, create and dump data all across that supply chain. We've often at conferences seen the graph of the shark fins of data loss that happen across each of those critical boundaries of the supply chain. And until we really address that risk of either wrong data, manipulated data, missing data, whatever, and also just the waste of the data creation itself. Those are the analog workflows that we really need to first digitize and make them digital, but then also digitalize and actually change the workflow in a way that actually streamlines it and makes it more efficient.
Yeah. And BIM by itself doesn't solve any of those. I mean, I was speaking to a mechanical electrical subcontractor recently who said, even though the project was using BIM through design, through construction, it effectively said that the design models that they were getting from the consultant engineers had to be thrown away. Like these were his words, and we had to start from scratch because there was no ways we could build what had been designed.
Yeah.
Yeah, so even though BIM had been used, it didn't automatically solve the problem there.
Well, and a great analogy to that, just real quick on BIM, if you think about the whole car and highway system and how all that works, BIM is the car. The car needs a driver. The car needs a highway that's maintained. The car needs traffic rules that all other cars follow and other drivers follow. It's just one car, and you can build a really crappy car and you can build a really good car. But yeah, thinking about BIM as really being the vehicle, but not necessarily the action. It's not driving, but it is the vehicle.
Just back to your point there about the project actually using BIM. It's arguable that it used BIM if the models had to be redeveloped at the construction phase. BIM, for me, refers to the digitization of the construction process, and the improper digitization of the construction process is not BIM. So they attempted to do BIM, they didn't deliver on BIM, and therefore they had these inefficiencies. That is how I would look at BIM. That's just my personal.
Well, and that's the trick of this, of the whole learning process, because the design process, like the goal shouldn't necessarily to build one single BIM right once and just have that be built. Sometimes there actually is value in rebuilding a BIM because it kind of forced you to go through it. But what are the ties and what are the links, and how is it referenced? How is that handed off from when an engineer ends and when a mechanical fabricator begins? We don't clearly establish that line. There's way too much overlap in how far an engineer goes and how much rework a mechanical does. But there is some level of redrawing and going through it, because that's actually how you learn what the engineer did and how they were thinking. Because you wouldn't be able to consume that just from a model itself. And models aren't smart enough. We need to put our cognitive knowledge and experience and skill sets. And that's why everyone says, collaborate early, get all those mindsets in. But what we're not doing is we're not capturing those ideas. We're not capturing those insights into the model. And rarely we're even sharing it at all. But kind of that's how I look at it from more of a builder's perspective.
And you've touched on the points there about the real problems are occurring at these exchange points between the different parties, and that's probably something that the CPC have been focusing on. The data exchanges that occur, transactions, if you like, between the different parties at the different stages. Do you want to talk a little bit about the
absolutely,
the exchange project?
Yeah, and I want to kind of clarify any potential misconceptions that we're out there trying to develop any standards, because we have no interest in developing BIM standards or data standards at any. There are so many folks out there, Building Smart and XBRL on the financial side, and U.S. Institute of Building Documentation on the reality capture side, that the standards are out there. What we're missing is the language to describe at the project level how they work together. And so when I talk about boundaries, a lot of this actually comes from Lean, and I have to give credit to Digby Christian and some research that he did. He was the project manager on the IPD project that I first started on, wrote a great paper for the International Group for Lean Construction on the boundary of realization and kind of this 4-phase project delivery, and sort of extrapolating on top of what he did about 5-6 years ago. We've identified essentially 3 different boundaries that separate the 4 phases of plan, design, build, and operate. And it's interesting because even if you look at Autodesk marketing and stuff, they say design, plan, build, operate, because they're still assuming the traditional method of you go to a designer, get a design, give it to a contractor to do the planning, and then you build. But in my mind, you're planning at the beginning with everyone, and then you pass the first boundary, which is our boundary of alignment, into that design phase that you're truly virtually building together and building that virtual prototype of what you're going to build, and doing design for manufacturing assembly and creating advanced work packages and doing all that stuff in that phase 2 in a very agile methodology. And then really the next boundary of realization, that critical point, if you're familiar with systems engineering, it'd be the bottom of the V in the V model. But that's where really the complete design gets released to be fabricated. So whether that's a permit release, whether that's a submittal stamp, whatever your designation of passing that boundary of realization, define what that is and really protect and own that, because it's a really critical kind of point of no return. Because once you're in that phase 3 build, it should be automated, it should be repeatable, it should be this batch and push and linear flow, just in time delivery, and we really shouldn't have any what ifs and go arounds and RFIs and things in that point, because we should have already asked them prior to that boundary realization. But again, we still have plans for them. We still have a way to attack them because they still might happen. But the goal is to measure them in a way that they don't happen in build and that they do happen in phase 2 design. So that then you can finally get to that as-built handover and kind of all those opportunities for digital twin at that boundary of certification. But again, what does that facility manager really need at the boundary of certification? And what are they doing to ensure that they've got the right data before they accept it into their system?
Yeah. So what specifically was the CPX project looking at, that exchange project? Is it's looking at those boundaries and the types of data that's being exchanged at those boundaries?
Yeah, it's a very macro level. I mean, so Common Data Exchange, CDX, is really trying to follow just behind where the world of open APIs and open interoperability is going. I mean, obviously you guys are very active in the OpenCD initiative, and getting IFC into JSON and being able to really pick apart the different data fields, because, in my mind, where we're coming from is we want to separate the metadata fields, the taxonomy structure, from the actual where that information comes from and where it's sourced, and really put the power into the hands of the project stakeholders to decide where they want to plug one data field into another. Almost kind of that visual that a Rhino or I guess Grasshopper or a Dynamo would give you, of kind of that connect and play. But think about that for how you would do an RFI, or how you would do a change order, how you would do a submittal, and really working all that out with the team in the beginning. That to me is kind of the idea of the CDX, is that we've got an understanding clearly of those 4 phases, those 3 boundaries that we just talked about, and that we also understand the different levels and tiers of risk that happen with our different documents. And so the kind of the other side of this is the tier 0 through the tier 4 that we established, of tier 0 really being the common data environment that we've all established and understood as, what should be the accessible single source of truth of, what's a reliable data that we can reference to build this project, or the current state of the project at any given time. And so the next level above that, tier 1, would just be any sort of collaboration, reporting, daily tracking logs, coordination issues, things that are not, super serious, kind of go into the tier 1. But then we establish a tier 2 to really, protect the spear and gap, or protect the designer's liability, that anytime something goes into tier 2, okay, we need a formal design response, and we've identified what that trigger is for what that response is. It could be an email reply, it could be a Slack reply, it could be a reply in someone's system, but what is that definition of from tier 2 to have a response? And then if that response has a cost or schedule impact, then it goes up into tier 3. And so that's your cost and schedule control. And then once that's decided of what that impact is, it has to be approved by the owner, which is where that tier 4 is. So this tier 0 through tier 4 is kind of a language we use to try and separate, what are the different documents as far as RFIs, submittals, daily reports, you name it, that are going to be on the project, and just trying to form some categorization so that technology can better know how to reference and tag them, essentially.
It sounds like a bit of ISO 19650.
Oh, a lot of parallels. Yeah, like it's almost a visual framework for everything that ISO 19650 is trying to prescribe. And so that's where, again, we're trying to sit back and say, how can we be a visual language to help communicate what ISO 19650 is trying to say? And so, again, yeah, anyone over there that's interested in working together on that, that's where we want to partner. And again, I can share some links to what we have online as far as how we're using the plug icons and the different personas and the documents, and really kind of visualizing what these workflows look like, and helping to communicate where the workflow breakdowns are, and also where the technology integration requirements, are needed.
And it's like you're codifying effectively what is good practice when it comes to dealing with all those issues, providing a sort of a roadmap. If somebody wanted to then turn that into applications, that you've gone through, these are the steps that have to occur, and these are the people that have to be involved. And
Yep. Just on top of that, Ralph, this is interesting, Nathan. As you know, with BIM Launcher, this is essentially what we do every day, is develop this framework to ensure information exchange between different technology providers, whether that be at the file document level or the object level within BIM models. It sounds like, and what I'm really interested to learn here is that the standard does is it takes information containers and creates this abstract level on top of them to bundle those information containers together so that they're exchangeable in the form of similar to a PDF.
Well, I don't know that, but I do know like one, again, just language that we've been using to describe the difference between like a file or container based exchange versus, I think you said object or just like a connector, right? Like what is a direct connector that's going to plug, metadata field in one system to metadata field in the other system, so that you don't have to worry about if it got in there right or if it was named, it's a direct connection versus this export of an IFC and import of an IFC and kind of hope that the data fields remain the same. But again, the backbone of what is IFC remains the same. It's just how you're passing the data rather than thinking of passing the whole package, even though you only need 3 fields out of it. It's saying, oh no, I'm just going to take those 3 fields from that package and connect it to this other database. So is it a file exchange or is it an API connector? We want to promote more API connectors and kind of create the capabilities for these different systems to be connectors. And that's really, I think to your point, John, where I think BIM Launcher comes in and you tell me, we have 3 levels right now that we're kind of, at least proposing for the industry right now, of step 1 being CDX listed. So, a BIM 360, a Procore, a Bluebeam, any of these that, have some sort of an open API are publishing their sort of API capability endpoints that says here's what's possible that you could do in all these different scenarios, so that a BIM launcher can work with a project team to actually set up that project and create the CDX validated sort of scenarios of what data is actually going to pass from one stakeholder to another in each of these different steps of all of these workflows, which yes, will take some time, but that's why we need to invest that time. That's in McLeany's curve that says, invest that time earlier and you'll reap those benefits further downstream. And so, really being there to focus on that CDX validation at the project level is what will allow us to start opting in and sharing more data at a consistent industry level, and sort of anonymizing that data. And that's where we get to that level of CDX verified that says, whether it's, here in the US it'd be the Construction Information Institute, CII, or Construction Users Roundtable, or some of these other organizations that kind of hold and keep a lot of data. It's like share it with them as their members so that they can create larger industry dashboards and larger trends that can help move the industry forward, but only when we're willing to sort of share that data in the first place.
It sounds like what you've described there is a project that we have open source called the API Explorer. Essentially aggregates all of the APIs into a single playground, if you like, so that you can, as a developer of connectors or developer of systems, I suppose, work out these workflows and how different systems can exchange information between themselves or amongst one another. So if you have a look on the BIM Launcher GitHub, you could actually pull that project and have a look. I think we have endpoints for BIM 360, Aconex, Procore, I'm trying to SharePoint, PlanGrid. So what I wanted to really come back to was PDF of information containers is the information container for linked document delivery, and it's an ISO standard. Mm-hmm. But for me, that is a premature abstraction because we do not yet have the language for information containers. And one of the challenges that BIM Launcher is actually having is that in order to exchange information between different technology providers, we need to create these abstractions for the different types of information that we're exchanging between them. And I think that's exactly what you were saying as well, Nathan.
Yep.
At the moment, that is lacking. So we have a couple of different organizations across the globe. I know that CPC is one of them. BIM Launcher is another. Building Smart OpenCDE API is another. we're all at the genesis phase of this growth of a set of technologies that will actually enable the efficient exchange between all these technology providers. Yep. And until we can come together and agree on a common set of standards around the information container, we can't productize any of our solutions. And through that, we can't actually make that pervasively available to the industry. I think we have a huge problem on that front. And I think that unless we come together through a standards body like Building Smart, or we go the other way and BIM Launcher goes to the US and starts working with you guys in the CPC, I think that we're going to actually struggle. The main point that I wanted to talk, or the result of this, was that the visual language that you've created, I would also call a premature abstraction. And The reason that I call it a premature abstraction is because we're not yet in the product phase. We're in the genesis phase. We're all trying to create this language, and it's, the CPC version. Yep. We have an organization in EU called CEN who work quite closely with the ISO. They have their version. And I think I've sent you documentation belong to their work before, Nathan. And if anyone's listening and wants to contact me, I can also give you their innovation. And then BIM Launcher has our own innovation, our way to do this. And there is some overlapping concepts amongst all three initiatives, and information containers is one of them.
100% agree. First off,
a lot of work to do.
Yes,
to be done.
Yeah. So
anyway, that's excellent. But Nathan, tell us a little bit about SpectrumAEC and what you're doing.
Yeah, well, and actually, I'll introduce Spectrum as I kind of respond a little bit to John's really good points there, because I think what you need is both, right? You need to both continue to advance what is possible with APIs and JSON and standards development and everything, but yet at the same time help. We're so far away on like an industry conceptualization and understanding of really what's necessary. Like what do I as a company need to have set up in my technology stack in order to have that conversation at the project level effectively with a BIM launcher to really do this. And it's a weakest link innovation in that all you need is one of those project stakeholders to not know what they're doing to ruin it for everybody. And that's kind of been the red mark on IPD and BIM whenever it doesn't work, is because it is a weakest link solution. And so, my focus and like where I'm trying to solve this personally, both through CPC and through SpectrumAEC, is sort of from the bottom up, and really looking at, focusing on what's not working and kind of putting those pieces together. So, with SpectrumAEC, I started that really off of some consulting work that I was doing while still inside DPR. I got to spend some time in the Middle East researching and consulting in Denmark with a contractor out there, and really understanding how it doesn't really matter, what region you're in, what culture you have, what contract you're set up with. There's some kind of fundamentals of how these components go together and how BIM and really just digital transformation as a whole is implemented. And so I've kind of taken those experiences of both really, intimately understanding the nuances of this industry, but also having learned all these, new innovative techniques of design thinking and agile and lean and kind of how do we create the cultural and process transformation that's needed for all this great technology to work as advertised. So, I try and be kind of helping prepare the customer for all this technology that's coming at them, so that they don't make that first mistake off the bat of expecting it to solve all their problems and kind of not putting in any of the work.
And I think part of the challenge is the industry has spent a lot of time solving problems in bespoke ways. The industry does get buildings built, and it does perform at some level. Mm-hmm. And many people within the industry have come across these challenges, and they've come up with bespoke solutions to some of these challenges, and they feel heavily invested in those bespoke solutions. Yep. So when you come along and say, well, actually, you've got a great way of doing things, but it doesn't comply with the way other people are doing things, they take that personally.
Well, yeah, and I think we all know a lot of BIM consultants in this industry that have their bespoke way that they think should be industry standard, and then they start spreading that across multiple parts of the industry, and it's kind of spoils everything. So yeah, really having a unified voice at that level of how should we be, what questions should we be asking first consistently, and can we agree on those? And really letting the customer provide the answers and not trying to tell them that we have the answers for them.
I slightly disagree there because, often the customers are the people who don't know how.
They don't understand.
How things.
They don't understand.
Yeah. And they just really want it to work. And they don't particularly want to get, I'm just thinking of booking a flight, for instance. If you think how fantastic the airline industries work nowadays, that you can go online, just book a flight and behind this, there's some incredible complexity where you're integrating with information from airlines and availability of seats and all sorts of things, which as a customer, you don't really care how that works in the background. You just want to put in your details, push a button, get an answer straight away, put in your card details, get a second answer and confirming that your place is booked. And the complexity of how it happens in the background, you're less interested in as the customer. But obviously, if you're on the service provider side, you have to be very interested in how that all functions and how that data flows between booking sites, travel agents, airlines, etc. So maybe asking the customer to provide the answer isn't the...
Well, so on that point, let's use the airplane example, because at whatever point they now gave you the option to actually choose your seat, right? Because I think what we're talking about is the power of choice. That the customer they do want it to be easy, but they also want to have options. And what the very, very sophisticated airline and very, very regimented and very, very opposite of construction industry, airline industry does is they're very, very sophisticated to give the power of choice to the customer while only giving them choices that are the correct answer per their needs. And so, yes, I agree with you, but we're a long way from that. And what we're not getting is we're getting customers that say, just fix it for me. But that's like saying, I want to get on this flight, but I'm not willing to get there on time or do anything, and then getting mad at the airline because it has its rules, right? So there is a certain amount of rules that the customer has to learn. And so how do we teach them those rules so that it is simple for them? Because the current rules don't work within the BIM world.
Yeah. Well, one of the things. Yeah, sure.
Sorry. Can I just continue on with that analogy while we're on it? So prior to this fantastic travel industry that we currently have, we had travel brokers and travel agents. Mm-hmm. They did not describe or explain to the customer how to actually do travel, if you like. And there was a disruption so they were once the provider. So they provided the service to the customer. Customer came in, they said, look, this is how it's done. Whereas if we look at what's being done now, that's like for like with the relationship between consultants and clients, let's say. So, if you look at, I suppose the provider changed in the travel industry. That was the main thing. So you had new companies come on, or companies that were enabled by the internet, which enabled accessibility, which enabled scale and innovation that, frankly, the travel agents couldn't contend with. So if you look at who in the construction industry are the providers today? Well, it's the technology providers, right? So it's Autodesk, Procore, etc. And if they aren't pushing these guys into a more efficient service or a more efficient service, and their business model is working just fine, we're going to have the exact same scenario as we did with the travel agent and the customer, where they're just going to feed the customer as much as they can until their market is disrupted. And I suppose my observation and question as a result would be, what is going to be the key thing to actually cause disruption to the way that people consume services around the development of our built environment?
So I think on that analogy, we have to go back a little bit, because who is each of those roles? Because Autodesk and them, they're software companies, but they're not Kayak, right? Because Kayak came in and replaced travel agents, whereas Autodesk and Procore and all these guys, and again, I don't know, maybe they are looking to replace contractors and replace architects. I don't think so anytime soon. They're a provider to the existing service that is supposed to enhance that existing service. So I think it's really tough to take B2C, business to customer examples and apply them to a business to business B2B industry. I think the closest example is probably healthcare and electronic medical records, and looking at what like Epic Systems, I don't know if they're international, but at least in the US, has really done to become this kind of new hidden backbone behind how electronic medical records are shared. And have really set a new standard, but not necessarily an open standard. And it's a little bit scary. But I don't know. I guess I'll leave it with that. It's very interesting. We could talk about this for days of like, where is the transformation going to happen? What is that Uber for construction? But the nice thing is we can literally look at every other industry to find the story of how they were disrupted, because we're the last ones to bat. Making sure that we're riding the wave forward with that disruption and not getting caught up in it. That's really the strategy these days.
Yeah. Yeah, I suppose I'd just pick up on, it's just something I have a little bit of a bugbear about. People keep saying that the client must drive change. And, the reason I have this issue is that if, in any other service, if you go to a doctor or a lawyer or an accountant or, the doctor doesn't expect the client or the patient to tell them how to do their job and how to do it with the best diagnosis and the best treatment possible. That's the doctor's role. The professional provider is meant to be up to speed with the latest technology developments in the medical industry and offer their patients the best diagnosis and the best treatment. That's
it's the regulator and the insurer that drive that, right?
Yeah.
And so what is the regulator and insurer in our industry? Where maybe it's not the owner, maybe it's the surety, maybe it's the municipality, and in UK it very much is. I mean, it's being driven by, top down mandates, and I agree that is how it should be. I also know in the US that's not always how it works.
Well, it's just when you talk to, like, the most common explanation we get from people as to why aren't you using BIM, for instance, because it's a technology that's been around for 20, 30 years, and it's just a better way of producing and managing information. Why wouldn't you do that? The most common answer we get to that is our clients are not asking us for that, and which to me just sounds crazy. Like, this better way of working is available to the industry, and yet the professional service providers, whether you're a designer or a contractor, are not availing of this better way and not offering that to their clients unless there's a real stipulated requirement, and even when there is a stipulated requirement, getting people to actually do it can be incredibly difficult.
Wow.
Anyway, gone off topic a little bit there, but it's a shared pain, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say, this is with them, this is shared pains, and that's the thing, is you never want to just leave with like, oh shit, that sucks, because the answer does come back in that case to educating an owner. That's an uneducated owner, and to me, if you're following that innovation curve, Moore's law, not Moore's law, but Jeffrey Moore. And innovation bell curve, don't focus on the laggards. Don't worry about them. Screw them. Focus on those that do care, if you care. And I think it's one of those things where, where I feel like we're right at that chasm. If you've read the book Crossing the Chasm, of that 15 to 18% kind of adoption, where once you pass that and can really get into, and I'm sure BIM as a whole is probably a larger adoption than that percentage, but I think kind of real value added BIM adoption, where they're really believers and promoters, is still probably in that, 15 to 18%. And so what are we doing now at this very critical point of this tipping point of adoption to make sure that those early adopters that are kind of ready to take the plunge, but still a little bit unsure, that we make them successful so that it continues to roll down that hill, and not get stuck with just the innovators and the early adopters.
Absolutely. If you look back, Nathan, in the last sort of year or two, and the work you've been doing, what do you feel has been, the greatest achievements, where you've made great strides in innovation, and what do you feel has been the biggest barriers? Like you thought this was going to happen and it just didn't happen for whatever reason.
Just hearing with these languages, that since all this COVID shutdown, we've been doing these virtual roundtables once a month where we bring about 70, 80 folks on and have 6 different roundtable discussions, and being able to listen to each one of them after the fact and hear other people using the language that we've sort of slowly inserted into the industry, and really getting a broad group of perspectives to all kind of align their understanding and align their language around at least what it is that we need to do, even though we may not necessarily know how to do it. Because I think we're at that stage where everybody understands there's a problem, but, they have no idea even where to begin with the solution. So, it's been really cool to see those discussions start to happen where people are, at least regardless, architect, engineer, contractor, owner, facility manager, we really are actually saying the same thing. Now it's, how do we take that to the next level? And I think that the frustration and the barrier has been that I think I actually expected the world of the APIs to be a little bit further along than it was. The more I started doing research and seeing what was out there, I go, oh, this should be pretty easy. But then once we start to actually get into that beta testing and that piloting phase, it gets really complicated really quick. And it continues to teach me that, that these things are always 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, and just be patient, be persistent, keep looking for those win-win scenarios where you really have motivated folks that want to see this happen, not just oh yeah, that'd be really nice if you can do that, but they're not really invested in it. You really have to find those folks on both sides of that exchange that are invested in seeing it be solved, and then really prove out those pilot use cases and continue to tell that story around the world so that others replicate the success.
Yeah. And that's I suppose that's a good segue into a kind of open closed discussion, because I mean that is characterizing a lot of the technology solutions in the construction sector are still very closed, and even their mindset around them is quite closed. And it's you can use our system and we do all these great things, but we can't connect that or use it with another system. Whereas if you look at just technology in general, even that's quite a new idea. If you think of how Microsoft just only a couple of years ago decided to begin to open up the way they work. Before that, you were either a Microsoft client or an Apple client or a Google client, but you couldn't really work between those, so you had to choose which technology stack if you like.
Well,
but now.
But let us remember, though, I mean, this was even before my time, but early 90s, it was a big deal when Microsoft first put Word and Excel on an Apple Macintosh. And, so like that actually has started a long time ago, but yet we still hold that culture, because back then it was super shocking. And even now it's still kind of shocking when competitors agree that it's actually in their best interest to talk to one another. But I mean, that's the example I give, is a Google Doc to a Microsoft Word document. I can make a comment in one, this very sophisticated thing with my name and timestamp and information, all this metadata, and I can save that as a different proprietary file type and open it up in the other, and it still works and brings in all that information. And so, I think that's just one example of the world that we're in today. And I would definitely separate the difference between I can't integrate versus I won't integrate. And there's a lot of folks that say, I want to integrate, but they really don't want to integrate, or say that they can, but they really can't. And so I think the capability versus the true intention to, all I can say is, the folks that are construction progress members, Autodesk, Procore, Bluebeam, Newforma, Sage, they really do believe that OpenAPI is where we need to go and are actively doing things to do it. It doesn't mean it's not hard. It doesn't mean they're not struggling with it. But I do believe that they have the right intentions, and we need both that and, the customers willing to open that stuff up too before this stuff will ever happen, and really come to the table and talk about it too. It's the willingness, and then also making time to actually talk through those scenarios and those requirements.
Yeah. And I think, when it comes to people on the ground, the architects, the engineers, the contractors, you don't want to be forced to make a choice on a particular technology because somebody else has made that choice. You want to use the tools because they are tools. So you want to use the tools that you're used to and the tools that that suit your role. I mean, if you're a designer, you want tools that are, that work well with design tools. And if you're a contractor, you want to use a different set of tools, and rightly so. But, often because of the closed nature of certain technologies now, you've been told as a designer, you have to use this tool that works for contractors because the contractor has decided.
Yep.
And, like you're forced into the situation to use a tool, not because it's actually the right tool for the job for what you do as a designer, but because somebody else in the food chain has made that decision, and the tool doesn't talk to another tool.
Yep. But using that exact example, so that's where we are close, because if you're in that scenario and a designer is using Newforma and they're now required to use a GC system in Procore, there is a Newforma to Procore API integration for submittals and RFIs that they should be proposing of saying, hey, rather than us needing to, or like if you need it in your system, like, are you open to using this, API integration that can solve that? So like if we can come to the table with those win-wins when we know they're there, we can actually start to solve these rather than just sort of throwing our hands up and have another beer, which I'm all for, and I love doing that, but I'd love to fix it too. So the more we're aware of what's capable, yes, it may not work in every scenario, but as long as we get the word out enough so that when that scenario does come up, we can solve that problem and tell the story about it. Because unfortunately, we haven't found many of those stories out there yet. The capabilities exist, but we're not finding the use cases, because usually by the time we find the shared pains, it's too far down the line in the project and it's not worth it. So like, how do we find that before the next project so that we can really solve it? That's half the battle.
Yeah. I was actually going to ask that, like who has the incentive to build these integrations, and because it's, as you say, people have just gone down a road and they've accepted the pain, if you like. They've lived with the pain, and often they don't see the need for them as an individual company to invest in the solution, particularly if that solution might have a benefit to other people. So why should you?
Kudos to Newforma. My understanding is that in the Newforma example, they were the ones that invested in the development of that integration through a third party, for their customers, because they had so many customers coming to them saying, hey, I'm being required to submit this up to Procore and now I'm doing a double entry. And, so they do, if there's enough customers complaining about it, I think that's a little bit of the thing, is we can get inside our own echo chambers and we think things are a big deal, but in the grander scheme of things, maybe they're not. So I think really, communicating these pain points and not just the cost of the waste of the inefficiency, but really the cost of the risk of the data loss or the wrong data, like you'd said before, John, is I think the selling point for it. And so that's kind of what I always come back to is, hey, if we're frustrated with it that they don't get it, it's probably as much that they don't get it, but also we're not selling it or explaining it well enough, right? So how do we rethink how we make our point in a way that will be compelling to that person rather than just being frustrated and judgmental that they don't get it?
And is that something that the CPC has as a role, as a non-profit, that you can bring a voice to a whole lot of people in the industry, so that the providers of these solutions see that it's not just one customer, but actually there's 20, 30, 40 customers within the CPC network that have the same shared pain?
Absolutely. And organizations too, right? So if you're looking to either, test your kind of sales pitch or vent your shared pain to a broader group that's going to give you a different perspective and not just say, yeah, you're right, screw that, let's go have a riot. It's trying to, create productive conversations out of those frustrations and start moving the needle forward by really understanding what are those mechanics, what are the parts of the change that I can control, and what are the parts that I can't control, but maybe I can talk to someone that can have a better influence over it.
Can I just comment there? Because from my engagement with the industry and obviously talking to our customers and potential customers, the problem is not the customers. Every customer knows that they're doing double data entry. If they have to transfer 9,000 files by hand, they know that they're doing double data entry and they know there's no solution to do that. The big problem and the reason that I found that these solutions doesn't exist, and Ralph touched upon it earlier, was the business model for the vendors. And the business model just isn't there. So the vendor wants companies to, if they're a project management solution that's working across either all stages of the life cycle or one specific stage of the life cycle, they want their customers working within their solutions. If a particular feature doesn't work, where you have to reach out and use a third-party application, that project management solution provider would prefer to build a feature for the customer than connect with a competitor's feature.
Yeah, that's true.
And what I found is then, and specifically to your point about New Forma built that connector, yes, number one, for existing customers, but number two, for future customers. Because Procore's platform strategy is so powerful, it's something that I've had customers, other vendors come to me and say, hey, John, we're thinking about actually taking a step back on saying, hey, to the industry, hey, we're a project management solution, and we're thinking about calling ourselves an application. And as an application, we can plug into these industry leaders. We can plug into the Aconex, Procore, Autodesk of this world. And our customer base quadruples it. It literally takes 80% of the market. And now they get to focus on one feature and go deep on that. Yep. And that is the key driver for outside of existing customers, future, the future customer need. And that's the business model that I find, especially for vendors, that is really working. So vendors don't want to lose out because their customers are annoyed at their solution. And you'll find a lot of vendors, and even the vendors we're integrating with, are all turned into a platform play. And the platform play is all about integrations and connections between solutions. And why is that so popular? It's so popular for the end users because they are getting the best in breed feature set that work effectively together.
Yep. Well, I was going to say that's when we'll know when we're disrupted. To your point, there is when the business model changes so that it's not all about getting enterprise agreements that your company wants to roll it out across every project, but that it's actually transactional based payment structures, so that the incentive is for the software to be used and be paid by being used, and that project teams actually select the best applications for the use case, and the payment models actually support that. Because right now the payment model supports, picking one for your entire enterprise and trying to, jam a square peg in a round hole on each of these projects. But the actual software business model itself needs to change. And again, when and how that will happen, I have no idea, but it will change somehow through disruption. Maybe blockchain, right?
What's the reach of the CPC? Is it mostly in the US, or are you dealing with groups in Europe and the Middle East and various other parts of the world? Or
yeah, I mean, mainly due just to time zone constraints. We're mostly North America, so US and Canada. We do have GeoSlam, a couple members that are in the UK and some contacts, but really what we're hoping to do is to kind of have groups that are in the UK, or groups that we have sort of a collaboration partner connections with. So AEC High being a great example, to sort of what are those cross the pond connection points that we should be talking about. Because, there's probably some stuff that's very specific to what you're doing that, we can necessarily kind of almost filter the noise a little bit, but there's other things that we should be sharing, between the two. So like how best do we do that? Would love to figure out how to create more of those. And I've been talking to John about moving one of our virtual roundtables up to earlier in the day so that, we can have more of our European friends join and kind of bring their perspective to the conversations.
Yeah, excellent. That sounds like a great idea. Okay, we've come up to the hour, and so I don't want to keep you too long, but do you want to give us any parting messages or words or encouragement to people listening? around solving your shared pains?
I mean, I guess definitely. I mean, if you head to constructionprogress.org, you can see we've got our own podcast, the Construction Shared Pains podcast, that again tries to dive deeper on both technical and non-technical concepts. You know, anything from diversity and inclusion to mental burnout to APIs and RFIs. So it's kind of fun conversations that you can check out there, as well as this whole conversation on common data exchange and the CDX initiatives. All that information and some of those graphics that we mentioned are on there to check out. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, because I know that's a big thing, probably even bigger in Europe than it is in the U.S. I am at Nathan C. Wood. The Construction Progress Coalition is at CP Coalition. And Spectrum AEC is at SpectrumAEC. So other than that, you can always email me as well, Nathan at SpectrumAEC.com. And just looking forward to meeting more people. I feel like I've met more folks virtually since this whole COVID shutdown that I wouldn't have normally. So it's always nice to, thanks to technology, continue to make these great connections. So thanks for having me, guys.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's great to have you on the show and all the great work you're doing. We've been following for a while, and it's I think we're absolutely happy to work with you to spread the word of what you're doing. I think it's really important that we solve these challenges for the industry. Yeah. John, any last words?
I'd just like to echo your words, Ralph. I think that what you're doing with the CPC, Nathan, is fantastic. And anything that I can do to help, Ralph can do to help, AEC Hive can do to help, to promote and give what you're doing a platform or help in any way, please feel free to, reach out to me, please, because I'd love to help. And finally, I believe that our paths are bright. We're all trying to solve this really prominent problem for the industry. And I'm sure our paths will cross amongst our explorations with the standardization of information containers and similar technologies to make this happen. So I'm looking forward to that as well. So thanks very much for taking the time to come on the podcast. And thanks to you as well, Ralph.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, and thank you guys. Just last point, I think you guys are definitely way ahead in this world as far as some progressive clients that want to do this. So really where you can help is when you've got that story, when you've got that use case, you're definitely further ahead of us, and we just want to follow behind you with some kind of simplified CDX documentation so we can tell those stories to our audience here in the U.S. So looking forward to keeping up with both our innovation efforts.
Excellent.
Thanks, Nathan.